Welcome to Can I Speak to Your Product Manager, the nitty-gritty with your favorite PMs. I'm Kyle Kolich, Vice President of Product at Zora.
And I'm Lucas Weber, Director of Product Management at Zora. On today's episode, we have Eugene Song, VP of Product Management at BrainPOP. And we're going to start off the show by talking about his recent Never Have I Ever moment, as well as his best tips and insights for being a successful PM in the ever-evolving business landscape. All right. Thanks for joining us today, Eugene. So each episode, we like to kick things off with a little game of Never Have I Ever.
Never have I ever.
Never have I ever.
Never have I ever.
Because as a PM, you probably get pushed to do things outside what you initially thought possible. And no matter what, it magically gets done. So we wanted to bring your experiences on this outside to the inside of the life of a PM and get to know you a little better. So Eugene, tell us a little bit about your Never Have I Ever.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, by the way. So my Never Have I Ever. During COVID, like a lot of folks, I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. And it's been a lifelong aspiration of mine to play the drums, to learn to play the drums. And I've been a musician my entire life. I play a bunch of different instruments, but I've never gotten around to being able to play the drums. So here it was with a lot of time on my hands and a basement at my disposal. And I started in earnest to teach myself how to play the drums. I bothered my drummer friends all the time, sending them like texts and videos. How do I do this? Am I doing this right? And I think the interesting thing for me about the entire process was it was humbling, at the very least, to be a beginner at something again. And I think you get to a certain stage in your life or your career where you're kind of getting more comfortable with who you are and the things that you do, and you spend a certain amount of time building up expertise in things, and to all of a sudden hit the reset button and go back to zero, and to be totally literally flailing around trying to figure out what's going on was a great learning experience. And it's so very different from playing so many other instruments that it was a real sort of context shift for me. So that was really, really great.
That's awesome. So okay, drums. So usually we think of drums as something we'd give to our neighbors or friends that we don't really like for their children, right. and see the chaos ensue. But so tell us more. Did you get an actual real drum set where you'd make the noise, or did you get one of these electronic digital ones where you could have a pair of headphones?
I decided to go for the most annoying thing I possibly could. I had an old drum set that had been literally sitting in storage for 10 years. I hauled the thing out. I set it up in the basement, and initially would I have young kids, and so would sneak down to the basement at night because that was the only time I could get down. Sneak down there at night and try to play as quietly as I possibly could. Which ultimately I realized this is not a good way to learn how to play. You can't do that, right? So eventually would have to find pockets of time throughout the day to actually go off and play. Thank God my wife is very accommodating for this particular hobby. And so, I would, bang around a lot and just try to learn to play songs that I really loved. But yeah, it's very noisy, very, very noisy.
Especially in the beginning, right? The beginning has got to be, you don't know how quiet you can be, how loud you can be. You're just, hitting, bang the drum as loud as you can and just trying to get a feel for it.
Absolutely. It's noise. There's no two ways about it. It's a ton of noise. And as far as my wife is concerned, it's still kind of noise, but it's fine. It's fine. It's a little more organized noise now.
You've gotten better. You said you've gotten better.
I have gotten better. It's true.
Well, so tell us about the getting better stuff, because honestly, I mean, I see all the drummers, right, on music videos or whatever. It just looks really easy, right? And it sounds like, given your experience in other instruments, I mean, I can actually see a guitar in the background here, right? So, and it sounds like maybe you know how to do that quite a bit. Did you make really quick progress? Was it just an easy thing to onboard? And, next weekend you were in a band. Can you tell us a little bit what that process looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the really interesting thing about this was, as you sort of inferred from the guitar, I've played, again, music for a long time, played guitar for probably 30 years. And so there was the amount of the progress, the speed with which I was making progress actually was like a barrier. I had to be much more forgiving of myself as to the amount of progress I was making or what technique I was able to nail or whatever. Because I was holding myself to this sort of artificial standard where I'd say to myself, well, I can do this like in my sleep, this type of thing or this other thing, playing the guitar. But I had to remind myself, look, remember, you're literally starting from scratch here. So you cannot hold yourself to that anymore. You have to open yourself to the possibility that it's just going to take you a while. You have to put in the hours, right? And we hear about this all the time, 10,000 hours, whatever. Totally true. Like you just have to just grind through and do it again and again and again at a certain point. And so the fascinating thing that I would see is that the thing that gets the most interaction or engagement on Instagram is usually the most flashy, like sensationalist kind of thing. And so the types of drumming that I would see on Instagram was people who could play super fast, super complex things, super clean, just unbelievably like talented professional people. Which overlooks the main purpose of having a drummer in a band, which is to set the heartbeat of the music and to really be the foundation upon which everyone else. And that requires a certain steadiness, to your playing. But there was definitely times where I'd look at the thing and go, oh man, I'm never going to be able to do that. Like that's insane. And so being able to sort of readjust your context, during this process constantly, I think is also really important.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. There's some really great insights. And of course, it's great to get to know you a little bit, right, through these stories of Never Have I Ever. But also, we want to now bring in kind of that PM perspective, right? So, can you give us maybe how this switch to a different instrument maybe applies to actually, your product management role? Is there some relationship there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, I think that the theme or the most powerful thing for me was being a beginner and really leaning into this idea of not knowing how to do something, but still going through the process of finding sort of like these handholds and footholds that you can use to make progress. And I think as a PM, oftentimes you find yourself in situations where you have imperfect data, you are missing data. Yeah, it's an ambiguous business situation. It's an ambiguous, issue with customers, and you don't have all the data that you want, right? Like I think we certainly earlier on at least in my PM career, there was this like idealized version of what product management was supposed to be like, and how you have all this data at your fingertips. And sometimes it's true. But there was also a lot of times where you don't have that, and the information is really imperfect, and you have to figure it out. And to me, I think that's this sort of beginner mindset where you say to yourself, I'm going to try to put aside as many of the preconceived notions as I have about what might be going on here, and to start a little bit from scratch, hit the reset button, and really try to be more critical about what it is that I'm looking for here. And as you sort of step through the process of figuring out what's happening, you look again for these handholds like, right, okay, this feels like maybe this kind of problem. Maybe I can verify that this other part feels like this part of this problem. And so through this sort of slow and steady process, again, it takes time. You got to move, but it takes time. Ultimately, you can sort of wade your way through the ambiguity and hopefully get to an action plan. So I think to me that's an invaluable trait for any successful PM, is to be able to drop into a situation where you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I guess I was always thinking that too. I have all this data, so all my decisions will be easily constructed based on the data set I have. But a lot of times it's a little, you sense the data is important. It's going to be there, but sometimes it doesn't give you that full picture. So there has to be the work and be able to kind of articulate where that goes and make the sometimes the educated guesses on the direction you want, like you said, the footholds or the positions of it. But if you have that framework in mind, it allows you to navigate those waters a lot easier, which makes a lot of sense.
There's a couple of other things that I picked out of this thing. Well, first of all, new area. You're not an expert coming into it, but I'm sure you've leveraged what you've done in music before, right? So bringing other experiences gave you things to look for, maybe those footholds or handholds to put yourself up. Two, you've gone through that process before, so you knew that it would take time to become good at something or become an expert or get the insights you needed, and the persistence. And of course, there was going to be frustration. I'm assuming that the learning process wasn't just a smooth path to victory, right? But there was a lot of persistence. But you knowing that you've done this before and it's worth the outcome, the persistence then paid off. And I think for every PM, honestly, it's quite exciting to start on something brand new, as frustrating and intimidating it may seem at first. Right, and then make progress based on that, and ultimately through persistence, actually gain insights, provide direction, and deliver the outcome.
Absolutely, yeah. Cool. We used to say back at NBC, invent with instinct, but validate with data, and that like it basically is I think that's a good encapsulation of actually what you were saying, Lucas. Right, like you have these experiences and you've built up these instincts. You should learn to trust the right ones, right? But you always have you check yourself, right? Get the feedback, check yourself. Start over, do it again, and again, and again.
And the other thing too with being a band, you play different roles, right? Don't you have different roles in the band and how you kind of guide it? And that's kind of similar with the product, being a product manager. And I think that helps us kind of talk a little about segment 2, which is innovation and the therapy and wild tales of it. So let's get in the nitty gritty, the day-to-day stuff, what's happening in the world of PMs. And I think one of those roles is, I think we talked a little bit before about, managing products and then managing product managers and kind of some of the things you had to like take in consideration and how to work through that. You mind talking a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's always a tricky or sort of odd transition, I think, for product managers to become, after being in the product and it's all you live and breathe for so long, to being put in a position where you're pretty far back from the product. You're separated away from it, 1 degree of separation or possibly more if you're managing managers and so on and so forth. And so I think for me, the interesting part of this was trying to construct frameworks for growth for product managers, right? I mean, you've got these people in here who are, ideally very sort of motivated, ambitious in what they do and very good at what they do, but they're always looking, well, what do I do? Like, how do I grow, right? How do I go from being like the expert in my area for my features or my feature sets or my products, and where do I go from there? And so one of the frameworks that I always use with my team is this idea of horizontal versus vertical influence. And so, a common refrain for PMs always is like, you lead through influence, right? You don't have any direct authority over anybody. And so I try to think about sort of directionality when it comes to wielding that influence, right? And so if you think about sort of vertical influence, or is like the depth with which your particular area, right? So you can go super deep on a very sort of narrow specific area, and as like a sort of a novice PM or like a mid-level PM, like that's kind of where you spend most of your time. I think as you start to graduate towards senior, and you become a little bit more seasoned, your horizontal influence starts to grow a little bit more. And by horizontal, I mean, okay, so outside of your immediate team, outside of your squad, outside of your particular product area, you're now starting to bring different ideas of how to actually practice product management to your colleagues, let's say, or, how we're going to manage certain things. You can sort of sideload mentorship to other PMs or that kind of thing. So you start to spread your influence a little bit around the product organization, maybe as a whole. And then as you get more and more senior, like that grows as well. There's sort of a tipping point also, I think, when you reach like the quote unquote director or like group sort of PM role, where you can become more of a horizontal influence to, say, other departments outside of product, right? So whether it's sales or operations or marketing or what have you, the breadth of your influence starts to grow. And then of course, once you reach more like leadership roles, head of product, VP product, et cetera, now you're really talking most of your vertical influence is like, you're not really going so deep on products anymore. You're going much wider. And so you're thinking much more broadly about all of the products that you happen to be responsible for, or the entire portfolio that you're responsible for. And your job as a PM, as far as like who you're influencing, becomes the different leaders of all the different departments, right? So how do I help set up the folks that I'm directly responsible for success by building these bridges and relationships with the other, my sort of peer set.
So I'm curious, and I'm just going to ask you. So you're working for BrainPOP right now. We'd love to hear a little bit more about maybe how you're applying just what you just said there. And maybe before we even go there, you could maybe tell us a little bit about what BrainPOP is and what do you guys do as a company?
Sure. BrainPOP is a digital learning resource and platform. We have been around for almost 25 years, I think, at this point. We like to say that we were edtech before edtech was a thing. We were streaming video before streaming video was a thing. You know, like we've been around for a while. We were most well known, I would say, for the content that we've been producing for all this time, which are these sort of short, sort of 5 to 7 minute long explainer videos, and that's across a variety of topics. I think we cover 1,000 different topics at this point, or probably more. And so that's kind of how we came up and got to everybody kind of got to know our product through these amazing videos that help explain concepts to kids. Over the years, we've evolved into more of a learning platform, right? So it's really not just about content consumption at this point. Now it's really more including things like different types of assessments, formative assessments and otherwise. And then ultimately, the shift that we've been making, pushing towards a lot harder over the past couple of years is how do we take the output of those assessments and actually show learning outcomes across a spectrum of different metrics, and then ultimately help inform the sort of next steps of learning for students and to help teachers that way. So that's like a super, super high level about what it is that we do.
Yeah, this is awesome. So that's so it's edtech and it's specifically for students, right? So particular ages, grades? Is it across the board?
We service K through 8th grade.
K through 8th. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So obviously the interesting thing was, I have kids and Kyle does too. And I think a lot of our listeners do as well. And of course, something's been happening over the past 2-3 years that had our kids be at home and do a lot of learning at home. Did that, how did that impact you guys?
It was hugely impactful, I think, for all of edtech. It was kind of a strange juxtaposition, I know, for a lot of us, where there were so many people that were having such a hard time during COVID times, but because everybody was remote and a lot of the learning was remote, or most places were 100% remote for a while. All of these schools and districts and teachers and other educators turned to digital learning resources to help their continue educating their students. And so, BrainPOP was definitely, we've always, again, we've been around for 25 years, we have a pretty big footprint, but COVID definitely sort of blew the doors open once again for us and a lot of other of our peers as well. And so from a sort of market or industry standpoint, what was interesting is that it sort of vastly accelerated the adoption of a lot of the infrastructure and technologies that are necessary in schools in order to actually support the types of learning that we can provide, as a digital provider or a digital learning provider. So that was sort of one thing that, one sort of aspect of the sort of industry or sea change that we saw. The other one was, with the uptake of all of these tools, a lot of districts found themselves with just a ton of these like subscriptions and contracts that they had signed for, because they had to just to survive. As learning swung back to in person, there was a lot of questions raised. Like I think any responsible administrator would ask, they go, hey, I have all this stuff on my budget now. Do I need it? Is it doing anything for me? Like, why should I keep it? I think also sort of naturally as we see always in sort of tech adoption or, just product adoption, your users become more educated about the thing that they're using. Their needs are becoming a little more nuanced. And so it's really not just like, okay, kids are at home, just put something in front of them, anything, we just got to get through this. Now it's like, oh, hang on a second, we can actually be a lot more critical about the types of tools that we're using and what it's actually doing for our students. Then they turn to folks like us and say, what are you doing for, like, prove it, like, show me what it is that, and so, I think the acceleration towards being able to prove learning outcomes and to show learning outcomes has been pretty swift, over the past couple of years across the industry. And so it's something that everybody's keenly interested in doing. There's no exactly like one way to do this either. It's the whole, as just generally speaking with education, there's no one way to solve all these problems. And so everybody is trying to figure out how can you best represent learning outcomes and growth to your users and customers.
Now, do you offer any classes for the parents so they can catch up on the new math and things that your kids are learning, and you don't seem like you're, how come, Daddy, you don't understand this? And like, you taught it differently back then. They didn't teach it this way.
they changed math. Oh, well, geez.
They changed math, and like, they didn't tell the parents, because I'm like, you're doing it wrong, Daddy. And like, well, I thought this is how you do it. So
yeah, no,
that's a good class. Maybe we should add that.
We should. Can't carry the one anymore. We do actually have a lot of teachers use our videos too, like to like sort of bone up on the basics. I know parents, like even during COVID, like we sent it out to parents and we were like, hey, we have this video on what's happening with COVID, like you should watch it. So I think our content is aimed at K-8, but man, it's universally accessible.
So this must be quite a challenging thing, both in terms of the growth, right, and adoption of your products. But I think the bigger challenge is you particularly mentioned that districts are looking for outcomes to prove this stuff. So this has got to just be something very challenging and really a great opportunity for you guys. Any recommendations that, given the great upswing and now kind of the grand rationalization, right, of these services, are you, what's changed?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something we've been focusing real hard on and pushing more towards as a company. Certainly it's reflected in our product as well. We've been rolling out, brand new reports and insights that are so much more granular and specific about exactly these types of learning outcomes, and have gotten incredibly great positive feedback from everybody that we've shown them to. I think as a product leader, as a VP of product, like the types of questions that I asked myself and my colleagues, head of design, head of user research, head of learning design, sort of all asked ourselves during this process was, we know kind of tactically how to solve some of these problems, and there's like a new report over here that we need to build, or a different type of assessment, or like whatever. But we also have a portfolio of products that have built up over the past 25 years or so. And so, you have this sort of like portfolio of products. How does it all fit together, right? Because you spend, like a lot of SaaS companies, you spend a lot of time like solving this problem over here, then you go solve that problem over there, and then there's another problem over there that you solve, right? And it's great. You've got this basket of SKUs that your sales team can go and sell. But when you're trying to sort of fundamentally shift the direction of the company and the perception of your company and the things that you're trying to do for your customers, who now their needs have changed quite drastically, in a relatively short period of time, especially when you're talking about education, which, the cycles are years long. You have to think, the challenge for us, I think, was to think a lot more holistically about the entire portfolio. How does this all fit together, and how do you steer that ship to the point where you're able to deliver these, as we talked about, these learning outcomes or whatever. There are different ways to do this, right? Like there are these like super dry, like test preppy kind of products out there that do that really well, and that's fine, but that's not us, right? So the additional challenge then that you have to concern yourself with the product is, what is the heart and soul of the product? Like, why do people even like this thing in the first place? Well, it's because of who we are. It's the way that I would argue that the one thing that we do better than anyone else in the entire world is the way that we talk to kids. The way that we communicate the information to children is our special sauce. Like it's amazing to like see our editorial and our video production team, like in our scriptwriter and all the people and learning designers and all the people that go into making this content, the way that they're able to frame these things and explain things, it's great, and it's always been our strength. And so how do you, and it sort of has infused itself through the DNA of the product in different ways. How do you make sure that you can take something that has been so amazing for so many people and so many kids, and the way that it talks in this sort of, and it's a very sort of, it's almost hard to nail down like what's so great about it. How do you take that and then also make this product that's like super rigorous, more linear, like is like infused with like recommendations and, it's that sort of thing. Like you're all of a sudden like formalizing a lot of this product in a way that's never been done before. How do we make sure that we address our customers' needs, and change the shape of the product and the company without losing the heart and soul of what made us great in the first place?
How you guys talk to kids is kind of like the way that you'd be different than the other companies that provide similar testing preps and different videos for learning, but that special sauce. I think you're right. It's hard to get it throughout all your products and have the all kind of navigate toward that North Star. But if they do, you create that very holistic experience for that customer throughout all of the interactions they have with, from from product A to product Z, which is very hard to do. But once you do, it almost seems easy to the user, right? It seems like intuitive, like it should be like this, but you don't understand how hard it was to get it like that.
Absolutely. Great technology gets out of the way, right? And so if it's really working the best way that it should, then it should be almost transparent to the like you see these. Oh God, it's amazing. You'll see these videos of kids, using our product in the classroom, and I have never seen. I don't know about y'all when you were in school or like what happened, but like kids will like do a BrainPOP movie and a BrainPOP activity, and afterwards they will literally get up and dance because they're so happy with the experience that they just had. And I'm like, I definitely don't remember at any point during my schooling getting up and dancing because I was so happy about the lesson I just got at school. Like
I was happy leaving. I was happy leaving the classroom.
Yeah, exactly. Bell rings, day's over. Now I'm dancing out the door. Yeah. That's great, but like, so it's an incredible challenge. Like, how do you make something that's more, on the one hand, quote unquote, academically rigorous, which you can argue about what that actually means. But, inevitably that's going to include some sort of assessment of what it is that you're learning. And it's going to, require from the teacher side, like now analyzing how the kids are doing. And then from the administrator, like, how do you make all that work in a way that doesn't lose the magic of what it is that made you great in the first place? It's great. It's a really cool challenge to have. It's a good place to be.
How to measure the magic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That is a challenge.
Yeah.
Super cool story. Excellent. Eugene, maybe good time to switch to our next segment called PM Power Moves.
Powering up.
Power move.
Which I wanted now to just narrow it down to, a moment or a situation where you need to really wrestle something down. And bring out the PM toolkits and power tools and whatever else necessary to get things done. Is there a particular story maybe that stands out in your mind that's worth talking through?
Yeah, there was a moment a few years ago where we were, as I mentioned earlier, we have this brand new product called BrainPOP Science that's specifically aimed at middle school students, grades around 6 to 8. And a couple of years ago, we were in the early phases of building what was essentially going to be a beta for this product. And we found ourselves in the position without a product lead on this initiative. And so, I kind of looked around the room and I was like, well, I guess it's me then. Like there's, if nobody's raising their hand, it's probably you. So I had to kind of roll up my sleeves and remember what it was like to be a PM again. And got back in there writing tickets and doing grooming sessions and, sprint planning, all this other stuff. And I think the interesting thing for me was, again, this sort of context shift. And it's, I guess, the reverse of what we were talking about before, right? Like all of a sudden finding yourself as a manager of managers and then flipping the switch and dropping back, And so I think as a PM, like that's a common sort of pattern, I guess, that you see with PMs is that you're often the gap filler in a lot of ways, right? Like if it's just not happening or something's, you just got to do it. You're responsible for getting the outcome and the output. So get in there and get it done, right? And so this is one of those instances where I found myself and I just had to go in there and figure this out. And in this particular case, I think the team was sort of stuck. There was, again, like they were swimming in ambiguity. It was, brand new product. Like something very, very new. The way that we were approaching building this product was something very new for the company at the time. We had a hard time nailing down the value proposition and so I felt like my chief role there and something, again, that I feel like a lot of PMs understand is like, how do you just get your team unstuck, right? Because you can swirl forever in this sort of analysis paralysis phase. And so, like for me, like it was making like the deep partnerships that I had with people, like my colleagues in design and so on and so forth, just getting together, jamming on stuff and trying to really break it down to the simplest thing possible, right? Like at some point, I think my colleague just went to her designer, was like, draw something, just draw, like stop sitting around talking about it, just draw something, just start, you know? It's not going to be perfect. We're going to throw it away. It's fine, but just start with something, right? And ultimately what we got to was we had to define what was the I know we talk about minimum viable product, minimum lovable product. It was, and that process for us was identifying a journey that was contained enough that we could build for beta in the amount of time that we had, that would showcase that this was different than our original product, right? Because again, like, because we had the luxury of building this product a few years ago, we had all of this already in our heads about, okay, this is gonna have to be much more rigorous, it has to be more standardized, we have to build from the ground up to do these things that the other product was not built from the ground up to do. So we had the luxury of all of that. What is the cleanest, simplest way to demonstrate that to anybody who happens upon this sort of early access version of the product? And so that was ultimately what we had to define, and I had to just sort of get in there and do it myself, I guess. And it was great, and it was certainly a learning process. And thank God I was able to hire somebody who was much better at me than doing all that, right at the tail end. And so I just kind of handed her. I was like, well, here it is, this is what you're getting, just so you know, like, we got to get this thing out the door, and then you can go on and do your own thing. And we did, and it was great. And the product is doing really, really well right now. The product itself is amazing. I think it's one of the coolest things I've had the pleasure of working on in a long time.
Yeah, you hear that a lot when you get kind of stuck and almost like an analysis paralysis mode where you don't know where to go. You want to get something out, and then you take too long. And what I've found too is that even if it's not perfect, get it in front of a customer or get it in front of a user sooner, because then you can start iterating and changing, right? Because if you take too long and try to, I'm going to build the perfect user flow, and you spend days and weeks doing it, and the customer goes, this makes no sense. This is hard. I don't like this. And you're like, oh no. Yeah. I'm assuming you test users, or how does that fold in your process of getting kind of the end user to try out these new products?
Yeah. We'll prototype things as rapidly as we can, whether honestly it's like a step above a napkin sketch sometimes, but we'll use things like Figma and it's clickable designs and that kind of stuff to get stuff in front of users as quickly as we can. To your point, that's the easiest way to figure out if something's even in the ballpark. Like if they look at the thing and they're like, what is, okay, all right, fine, back to the drawing board. Yeah, absolutely. We try to prototype as much as we possibly can, certainly in the early stages of something like this.
And I think the other point that you made is that sometimes you find that on your team, there may actually not be a team member to take on something that needs to get done, right? And one of the things you particularly pointed out on here is that, the product lead was actually not there. I think the key thing you're highlighting there, sometimes the right person to the job is actually you, right? So the key thing obviously is not to take everybody's job away, but the point is when there is a gap to fill it, and that is really the job of a product manager, right? Is to manage what needs to be done, sometimes by pitching in.
I think this also goes into another role of product managers to know if to ship it or to skip it.
What do you want to do?
Let's do it.
No.
No. Maybe. Yes.
This is our last segment to talk about where, it's going to be for fun. And, we'll throw a couple product examples out there of would you ship it, bring it to market, or just skip it and hide it away from everybody? So the first one, because you're a drummer, and I know there's a controversy about drumming, on the plastic tip drumsticks over the wooden ones.
I skip the plastic tips, man. I skip it. Yeah, I'm a purist, man. Go. It's got to be wooden. I can't do the plastic tips.
There's a whole board about that.
Yep.
I wanted to get your opinion on it. I'm like, oh wow, there's a lot of debate on that one.
Yeah, I'm sure I pissed somebody off by saying that, but yeah, it's got to be. Forget the plastic tips.
Okay, all right. We'll definitely hide the trolls and comments off of that one. What about Google Glass?
Oh man, I'm gonna say ship it. I think that it had an unfortunate reception. I think when it first came out, I have a picture of myself trying on a pair when I worked at the New York Times. We got an advanced set of these, and I did look ridiculous with these on. I think that there's such a cool use case for these things though, if you get it right. And I don't think that it's like the everyday, like day-to-day thing that, people just walk around with this thing. I think like, and I actually think the Glass team went and did this. Like, I think they went and looked at industry and figured out, are there ways that we can actually help people, in like on like factory lines as an example. I think this is the experiment they ran, right? And like, oh God, I think that stuff I think is amazing. It would be an amazing and not so ridiculous looking application of something like this. But yeah, hopefully we can get there.
It also could fold into some of the learning too. I mean, there has to be some way of maybe folded in to help kids learn better, and we haven't tied the dots, but there may be something there.
Absolutely.
Flying cars.
Oof. I'd skip it for now. I'd skip it.
Okay.
I feel like we gotta get the regular cars. Like, there's a lot that we need to do with some regular. Yeah. I think I flying cars. I would be nervous to get them. I'm gonna skip it. Yeah. I'm gonna skip it.
I mean, maybe with Lucas, because he is a pilot, so I feel better if he was using it. But maybe just
absolutely
me, who lives in New York, who drives maybe once every 6 months. I probably shouldn't be in front of a car that flies.
Yeah, definitely not in front of the car, Kyle. Be inside the car. Just pro tip.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Spoken like a true New Yorker. I love it. It's great.
That's right.
Studying abroad. That was interesting.
Wow.
I'd
certainly ship that. I think yes. Yeah, I'd ship that. I think study is for people who can get, access that kind of thing, and it'd be great if it was more accessible. I think we spend so much time in our own bubbles, right? Like, and I think it's always. I actually never studied abroad myself during school. I've had other experiences sort of traveling abroad and doing other things, and I think it always is just a great way to take yourself outside of your context, learn something new about the way that other people live, and how they think. And ideally, my theory is that everybody's more or less the same, right? But I think at their core, everybody kind of wants the same thing. And I think one of the great things about going abroad is learning the different ways that people sort of approach that particular problem for themselves. So I would say, yeah, I'd ship it. I'd keep studying abroad.
Always up for getting a new perspective on things, right? Around the things that everybody cares about and what's valuable. All focusing on outcomes. Awesome, Eugene. Excellent. Yeah. Kyle, anything else on your list of ship it to skip it?
No, I think that was it. I want to thank you, Eugene, for joining us today. I think it was a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.
This
was super fun. Thank you all.
Okay. Well, it was a great conversation, Lucas. I don't know what you thought, but I think I learned a lot. I liked the way he talked about the data, and I like that quote of invent with instinct to validate with data. I think that's a really valuable quote. I think a lot of PMs kind of run through that. I like the framework he had about the horizontal and vertical moments as a PM, and how as you progress through your career, that perspective changes and you kind of go wider and wider and less vertical. And then I think I like the when he looked at his products and that heart and soul of what made it great and how they were good at talking to kids, kind of gravitated all the products to kind of line to that North Star and kind of give that journey to that customer to feel very consistent across all the products and give them that the customer feeling that this is easy, this is great, I like using this, even though again it was very hard to get all that collaborated, but to put it together was pretty great. Lucas, what did you think? What'd you come out with?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Agreed with the points you've made. Really enjoyed the conversation. I think my biggest takeaway really was looking for those new experiences and going into it with an open mind and persisting through it, whether that's learning how to play drums, right, where we started, learning to work through challenging times, like what might be a great opportunity with COVID there, but also then the great challenge of staying with the customers that have used you in those times, which were, I think, kind of unique, and continuing to show value and outcomes even in the longer term. And then we talked also about launching the brand new product there. And like I said, there was some, no real idea, lots of great things, but no clear path forward. And so the idea is to just leap in, learn quickly, persist, even though it may be frustrating, and then ultimately focus on the outcomes, and then ultimately launching new products as well. So I really like that. And I think the last insight that I took away from it was really, great tech gets out of the way, right? Google Glass was a great question on our Ship It to Skip It. That's a very visible tech that's kind of in the way. But obviously, if it has the right killer app in it, then it will be useful and can get out of the way and allow you to do wonderful things. So again, great conversation with Eugene Song. Looking forward to having him on again at some time in the future and seeing if he picked up another instrument.
That's true, and I'm definitely taking the class on new math, so I can help my kids get past third grade.
That's awesome. All right, very good. Great conversation with Eugene again. Thanks so much for joining us. Would love to have you obviously join us on the next episode. So please don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you and talk to you on the next episode. Thank you. Take care.